Hello, good evening, and 16 cinematic perspectives on Germany. My name is Christina Nord. I'm the head of the Berlinale Forum, an independent section of the Berlinale, which is run by the Arsenal Institute for Film and Video Art. I am truly delighted that we can offer this film series, and I would like to express my deepest gratitude to the curators Inoka Yemba, Katarina Griffith, Jacqueline Zia, Bine Pilavci, and Jan Zungo. I'd also like to thank the digital discursive program, which is beginning today. I don't want to occupy too much space. That would be very counterproductive if I did so. So please allow me to briefly introduce tonight's moderator, Katarina Hedrén. Katarina Hedrén is a film curator and film critic based in Johannesburg. She was a chairperson of Cinema Africa Film Festival in Sweden, former director of the European Film Festival in South Africa, and a current member of the film selection committees for FESPACO, the prestigious festival in Burkina Faso in the city of Ouagadougou, and also for Film Africa in London. As a writer and critic, her work appears on various platforms, including the Pan-African platform, Africa is a Country, the Swedish periodical FLM magazine, and the anthology Gays, Regimes, Films and Feminisms in Africa. And without further ado, I'd like to pass the floor, or better the screen, to Katarina.
Thank you, Christina. Yes, I'm Katarina Hedrén. I am very grateful for the confidence to moderate this evening's conversation between curators / writers / researchers Jemma Desai from London and Olivier Marboeuf from Rennes. I'll read their bios to you, and you'll also be able to find them on Berlinale Forum website. I'm looking forward to this discussion, and I'm looking forward to the engagement also of you who are listening. I hope that you will also come in with your reflections and questions throughout the conversation. I'd like to start, tell you about Jemma Desai. Jemma Desai's practice engages with film programming through the research, writing, performance, as well as informally organized settings for deep study. And her work experience spans distribution, cinema exhibition, and festival programming. Her most recent body of work is This Work Isn't For Us, which draws attention to the human cost of attempting institutional reform while navigating diversity policy rooted in white supremacy. She has previously worked at institutions such as the BFI and British Council, and is interested in the way imperialism replicates itself through institutionalized work processes and translates into the ways we relate to one another through art. She is currently head of programming at Berwick Film and Media Arts Festival, and is about to undertake a practice-based PhD on the histories of liberatory performance and moving image, and the possibilities opened up through ideas of abolitionist praxis at Central School of Speech and Drama. Olivier Marboeuf is a writer, storyteller, and curator. He founded and ran the independent art center Espace Chiasma in Les Lilas outside Paris between 2004 and 2018. At Chiasma, he has developed a program addressing minority representations through exhibitions, screenings, debates, performances, and collaborative projects. Interested in the different modalities of transmission of knowledge, Olivier Marboeuf imagines permanent or ephemeral structures based on conversation and speculative narratives. He is a film producer at Spectre Productions and author of the blog Toujours Debout. Welcome, both of you. Do you want to add something or deduct something or change something before we start?
You did a really good job.
Yeah, it's perfect. Thank you very much, Katarina.
I'm a brilliant reader. So let's get into it. So the headline is Creating Spaces, Sharing Spaces. And the discussion description reads, the cultural sector in Western European countries likes to think of itself as open, progressive, and international. But discrimination is part of everyday life here as well, neither stopping at the barriers blocking off a film set nor at the doors of the rehearsal spaces of prestigious theaters. Diversity officers are often no more than fig leaves. What does that mean for cultural workers of color? What alternative approaches are they developing? And how can cultural spaces and institutions be transformed so that they more accurately reflect the heterogeneity of society? That's the framing. I would prefer to focus on the second part of the three-part question. What alternative approaches do cultural workers of color
Recording in progress.
Sorry, what alternative approaches do cultural workers of color develop instead of how cultural spaces and institutions be transformed? I believe that the key word here is creation, in creating spaces, creation that can happen both in new and existing locations. I think it's up to the non-transformed cultural institutions to critically look at how they do not transform, analyzing their design because the non-transformation is intentional and inherent to organizations designed for self-preservation. So to look at their own policies, rules, and practices. And I would recommend that they hire cultural workers of color as consultants or even better managers, long-term or short-term, to make true transformation happen. And while that is happening, let's hear then from the cultural workers we have here today, how you think about creating and sharing exclusive spaces outside these institutions, sometimes in dialogue with them, and also when inside these institutions, and perhaps not then transformation for the sake of the institutions, but for its stakeholders, artists, audiences, and concerned communities. And in this discussion, I'm interested in your experiences, your knowledge, but also in your doubts, in your questions, and in your unresolved issues and conflicts. So I'll be very happy to delve into that. Also, both of you have an affinity for, like, do not shy away from discomfort and insecurity. So I hope we can go there too. And including there, I'll also, if you disagree with that approach, if you think that it is a value of talking about institutions and how they can change, please feel free to also contradict me on that and focus on that. Okay. So like, if we start just like for the setting, you both working in like the hybrid approach that you both share and have adopted in your strategies, how you operate in various capacities as creatives, as facilitators, as thinkers and writers, as gate openers as opposed to gatekeepers. And working across art forms. And I think if you could just speak a little bit about that, and then I think we'll narrow in on film in particular, since this film is the context and there's a lot to say on. Is that too wide an opening to ask you to start speaking?
That's okay.
Yeah.
Jemma, you want to start, please?
Yeah, sure. I think it's interesting because it's kind of, I don't know, it's accidental that, and I think most people would say this, who have some sort of multiplus practice and are also politically situated, that it isn't always intentional, that you have lots of different things that you do. I think there's this like neoliberal idea that you're like this, you have a portfolio career. and that's something that you intend. But actually, I think my practice and my work comes from my life, and things that I care about. And then also the ways that I've navigated my career has also been because of politics. So that it's also been because some things haven't worked and been easy for me. So I think sometimes when you enter very monocultural spaces, for some people, there's a really clear line. You just go through the organization and you stay in one place forever, maybe. I don't know. That's never been the case for people like me from my social class position, and from, you know, my heritage position, in terms of, like, you know, my parents don't work in the arts. They would never have been able to help me to navigate it. So in a way, it's just like an accident. But I also think, so I started out working actually not in the arts really. I worked in heritage. I worked for an archive in London called the Black Cultural Archives, just kind of working in there, studying it, like spending time cataloguing it. It was while I was doing my master's in cultural heritage, which is when I first started reading about post-colonial theory and cultural studies, and discovered like Stuart Hall. But then I entered the arts, I entered the film industry like quite soon afterwards. And I think I was actually really, like, my mind was kind of colonized for a little while as well, like, because that knowledge wasn't valued at all. So I kind of had to take on a different value system for a little while. And it was through doing this research, like later on, that I realized that I had come back to a way of thinking that I had already learned in my studies before. And a way of thinking that actually like actualized the value system that I had. And what has been super interesting to me is that that work, even though it's about the film industry, has been largely embraced by the worlds of theatre and the art world. And they aren't necessarily worlds that I ever had access to before or knew much about. But that tells me something about distance. So my research is specifically about the film industry, but the film industry doesn't want to engage with it because it's too close. But maybe the art world and the theatre world and the world of performance kind of find it much more interesting to engage with, because it's not naming any of the institutions that it would really be too complicit in. So yeah, I'm kind of interested in that dissonance, I guess, and navigation, and why you end up in the places that you do.
Thanks.
Yeah, I want perhaps to begin in the same way that Jemma did. I think because it's a really important first statement. My work is coming from my life. And I will say it could be a statement for a lot of people of color. And in the idea that you believe that a better life is possible, I think that those notions are really, really important for me, and I think are really structural elements if we want to build another kind of place. I don't know if we're going to transform or build, but first things is talk from your life and your life experience in the hope of a better life, meaning that you want really deeply to have a better life and to transform situation to a better situation, meaning that you are not playing with political issues like, you know, metaphor and games. You want deeply inside of you that things happen. This, for me, it's a really simple thing, talking from your life and having the desire of a real concrete transformation in your life and in the life of the people around you is already a really strong statement to talk about art, because I don't think art is that. I think it's really the problem, the fakeness of the art with that two questions, speaking from your life and speaking with a real desire of transformation, and not only manipulating some metaphors and fake political statements. For me, it's really, really, really important. And so I will borrow that expression of Ruth Wilson Gilmore, the American scholar, about abolition, and she's talking about a form of life in rehearsal. So let's say, for me, it's the best definition that we can give to a political involved art, a form of life in rehearsal, meaning that we are doing what we are doing to experiment a possible life to come. And we believe in its possibility. It is really, really, really important. From that starting point, I think that you already, do the first moment of rupture. And I like too that Jemma talk about a certain personal moment of rupture in your storytelling of your own life, because I always share with other people I'm working with, and mainly people of color, the really importance of being able to tell our stories in with our own words. And we don't have to be ashamed by have been here and there, and suddenly you discover, understand things, and you discover yourself, because everything is done to blind you. Everything is done to fragment our inheritance. Everything is done to us feel totally lost and not together. So to answer the first thing you asked, Katarina, about having multiple activities, for me, I will say that it's linked to a certain necessity of reassemble and reweaving fragmented element that is our part of my own life. And so I use different tools from different situations to understand and to get what I've been blind, hidden. So you can use your voice, you can use films, the writing, but all those techniques are used to find some bit of your own life. So never ask two people to tell you the truth, because the plantation system is based on the fiction that we call history. So for people of color, we are in front of a fiction, so we have to dig in that fiction. And I will take also from Sylva Winter that idea of the economy of the plot against the economy of the plantation. And so for me, what we are doing is really that small plot that we have to assemble. And so I do think there is another things that I know now, and that's why I said the storytelling of you, the self practice of storytelling your own life, is central for people that is that are descendant of colonial subjects, because it's a practice of reassembling your own life, trying to tell it and tell it and tell it again. You can't do it once, you have to tell it really often. So a lot of people are seduced about the idea, for instance, of repetition in the Caribbean culture, for instance, as a kind of super seductive patterns. But I will say, let's talk from a perspective of a life concerned by that. The repetition is just necessary for a Black subject because people don't listen to you. So basically, you have to repeat. It's not an aesthetic. Firstly, it's something really simple. We have to repeat to the other, but to ourselves too. Who are we? And so this is a practice of becoming permanently. And so for me, it's important because, if, for instance, because I'm coming from the Caribbean French context, the epistemology is based on the fragmented and dispersed element of culture, meaning that there are no philosophers in the Caribbean context. They are all poets, writer, singer, and so philosopher, meaning that the practice of philosophy as it is assembled and radical in the Western epistemology exists for sure in the Caribbean context, but fragmented in 3 or 4 different forms of practice, and that we have to assemble them. So you see with, for instance, Edouard Glissant or others, that they all are poets. And for us, writing poetry, and I myself writing poetry, is a part of our theoretical research for sure. So it's a different epistemology, and so we have to learn it for ourselves, because I've been educated in France, in metropolitan France, and I've been really dispersed of my own heritage. So it's a really permanent research on yourself. And even nowadays, you good friends, when you discover some potential alliance and assemblage, they tell you, it's not so simple than that. People of color are always a bit stupid. They always have bad ideas. Oh, you shouldn't consider that, Olivier, Even if you are respected by people, people keep on giving lesson. And so the practice of giving lesson to people are so central in me that in my next book, there is a series of lessons. Because I find it's really incredible, interesting to look at how the white supremacy is giving lesson, even as a kind of friendship. I give you a piece of advice. I tell you, be careful, not only work with people of color. It's not as simple as that. African and Caribbean people, they are not the same, etc., etc., etc. So this is a strategy of diversion and of dispersion. So that's why you have to take a lot of different tools to reassemble ourselves, to be able to talk as a really strong subject that we are not at the beginning. We are fragile, and we have to accept that we are.
Thank you. That's funny. My lesson is always never, ever, ever be the only black person, brown person in every context. It's lethal. I'm just I'm jumping a little bit, but in your text, Jemma, you say from the beginning, this work is not this work is not for us. You start by stating very clearly that you do not, we're going to go back to it, but one point I want to talk about here, you do not want to explain why change is necessary, because that's a given. And I think that is a very important position towards the outside, so to say, the world that needs to be penetrated or the hegemony that need to be dismantled. But I do think it's important for ourselves in this work to have a vision, and very often we use words, I think, so inclusion and sharing, etc., and sometimes we do not define them. And I'm thinking it's important for us to know what it is we actually are envisioning, what our vision is, and here's one aspect of discomfort also. When we do that, when we actually word what it means for each and every one of us, it will look different, and that's interesting in itself. But if you could just speak about your own visions to begin with, so just to
I think I also just wanted to just witness what Olivier just said, and just there was so much in what you shared, Olivier, that I think is really at the center of this other question, because really for me, and I wouldn't so basically this work isn't for us was described to me by my friend, an incredible thinker, Aditi Jagannathan, as this kind of this record of me teaching myself to be myself again. Like that I had to go into all of these spaces, Olivier, that you like just described, of history that had been withheld, of effects, of repetition, ritualized repetition, to go over experiences and truly present them and write them down. Because often, not only are you given unsolicited advice by people in these spaces, you are also told that your perception of reality is wrong. Oh, they didn't mean that. That's, that it didn't happen because of that, right? So this was like this way of me just making sense of those moments. And that wasn't the same as sharing trauma, right? This was I feel like the work was a ritual, and sometimes I read it now and I'm like, I don't remember writing it because I was in such a particular space of outpouring and recording this journey that, this rupture, as you described, Olivier, and in a way, like, it's closer to poetry than to academic text. And I'm not saying as if like I'm this poetic writer, but in terms of its intention, right? It was trying to order thoughts, and it wasn't really thinking about a structure that already existed, which I think in a way is the essence of poetry. It's like, it takes a form, but the intention of it is to be formless and to be fragmented and not always to be rendered whole. And this other thing to make that less abstract, I guess, is this thing about legibility. So the process of this work isn't for us was to try and explain things, even though I say in it, I'm not going to explain this thing. I am trying to explain things. I am trying to order an argument and make a case for something to change. And I thought at the end of it that it was this case for reform. And actually now it's about practices of freedom and how impossible it is to practice freedom in these spaces. And that it's a record of that. It's a record of me trying to practice freedom in all of these spaces and coming against collisions. And what was really interesting about this, which I think of why I think of it as a more of a spiritual piece than a piece of research now is that this piece of research was finished at the end of February, like 2020. The pandemic happened, the uprisings happened, and it circulated at this time that made it make sense to me in a different way, right?
Yeah.
I never would have got this education about abolition as quickly alongside this research circulating if those things hadn't happened. And then I understood this piece in a completely different way. So some of the people that you were referring to, Olivier, like I came to after, like Sylvia Winter's work, like came to me like afterwards. But I see it as totally in those principles of liberation, liberatory practice, of abolitionist practice. Like it's writing in that logic, which is it's not about trying to mend things that are broken. Actually, it's about investing in the things that keep us whole. And so I guess in terms, yeah, I think of my perspective or my vision is liberation. And I guess that the other thing about the journey that you were describing, Olivier, like there are some words that now make more sense to me after this journey and would not have made, and I think that is the only way that I can describe that is a spiritual journey of coming to know. And I think that until this language of diversity and inclusion can hold that spiritual journey, that spiritual debt that we owe to each other, it's totally meaningless. Like, because it doesn't relate to our experiences. It doesn't relate to our responsibilities to one another. It doesn't relate to freedom and liberation if it can't hold that.
Yeah, I think it's totally something that makes sense strongly for me, and to try to also answer to what Katarina tried to address about giving some more precise definition of what some tools. I will say that we are building a language, dismantling the language itself. So this is, I always try to take that images that for me is really strong from the Creole storyteller. That's why in my bio that I wrote storyteller is really a really precise source in that case. What does it mean? In the Creole storyteller and the really beginning of the practice of storytelling in the Caribbean context, in the plantation time, that is for me also my own history of what I call de-speaking cinema, and I will talk it later. That cinema was already exist at that moment, because without the capacity of projection of images of other world inside the death itself, because plantation is not a prison, plantation is death. It's a non-existence. So there's a huge difference in between a captive person and a slave. A slave is a non-existence. So you have to come back to the existence, which is the worst journey that you have to do from the nothingness to the life. And so the movement of to the life has been created also through the practice of storytelling. One day a man will stand up and decide to begin to talk with all the slaves at that very moment that they don't have a really common languages, because they are coming from different places in Africa. It was really the beginning of the Creole production. So he's speaking with the necessity of speaking, and in certain way is building a language while he's telling stories. And I think we got the same problem. He said, what do you mean? I'm trying to build a language and to talk at the same time, meaning that I don't have any floor, and my languages, each word I try to address is the ground I'm on. So this is a moving ground. This is, that's why you can address that and that and that, because you says I have to address everything in the process of construction, the story itself, but the words too. You know, when you are writing at the moment, sometimes some words, you can't use them. You say, I have to find something else. I have to look for, and so you have to have the practice of performance, of saying things, help you to trying a way to use words in a other kind of speed, for instance. So expressing theory in the perspective of minority and the people of color is also an issue of speed, an issue of noise, an issue of saturation, an issue of frequencies. This is not only the European philosophy written in the book. There is a lot of other tools that we are using to create a new languages. And I really felt that working for students, for instance, saying really simple statement, but in a really specific emotional situation, you feel that the get thinks, okay, the people say, okay, I get it now. Saying like exactly how you said now, I get it. But not in the text, is really the really now, what is produced for us now, here and now. So there is really that issue that it's a part of our fragility, that we're obliged to try to live from a certain form of death, which is in the language too, because the plantation is in the language. And so you see is that, for instance, and so we have to leave from a place of death to a place of living, which is unknown. And imagine the Maroon people, when they moved from the plantation, it was not to go to somewhere else. It was just a decision to leave death. So it was a huge gap, that because they didn't have any idea of what was possible else than the plantation. We have to remember that. And so we are, I think, with that moment we are living now in the European context, at the moment we want to open something to freedom, but we don't really know what it is. We feel deeply, but we don't know. It's not a knowledge. It's a really deep feeling, but that feeling is enough. It's enough. If you feel it, this is life. So if you feel it, you have to go in that direction. And we don't have to give any explanation. When the slave were leaving the plantation, it was not with a letter to the master saying, I'm sorry, I can't stay in that plantation because really the job is not good. He left and said nothing. And so we are in the same situation now, but this is not to live to the outside of the world, because there is only one world. So it's a kind of transformative living too. We are to live to a ground that is the toxic ground that have been transformed with a new language. So everything have to be, have to be put in action at the same moment. That's why I was saying that for me, the life to come for the people of color is a cacophony. But it's not for me a default to be a cacophony. It is a form of saying. We are speaking in a cacophony, meaning a kind of way of for like rupture. If you need a certain kind of energy, to break the shield. Even for cinema, stop looking to image that way. You have to go through things and say, okay.
I think, like I think about dissonance as like this thing about cacophony as well, but I think it's interesting because I don't think people are paying attention to that dissonance in maybe the same way that you are describing, because I still I think about the language of like the work that I do in film festivals, for instance, the language of like submission, like submitting your film, like please look at my film, please assess my film, right? Like this language of supplication. And it's all very imperialist, but we aren't ready to talk about that. We are ready to talk about, and it's interesting actually, because we are potentially gaining a little bit of literacy around authorship. But even that is like quite neo-colonial in the sense of often programmers from the West will just see, we'll see a film from India, but won't see who has made it and what privileges that person is moving from. They will just see two brown people making a film about each other. Okay. And that's okay. And, all of this like political situated literacy moves out of the window in that point. And there is a lot of stuff that circulates that is feeding this very neo-colonial gaze, and it's funded by these agencies to do that, right? So there's this really damaging circulation where we are looking at this language of diversity inclusion, which is essentially like missionary talk, right? Let's invite a few people in, colonize their minds, make them one of us, and then let's move on, and we've done our bit. But there's no attention on this other stuff, which is in the films that we are programming. All of this is in there. Like, as you're saying, it's in the language of image making. And so much of the work that's fetishized is way more radical than it ever comes to light, because the people that are writing about it, the kinds of conversations that we have, can't even unleash it, right? So is that freedom? I don't know. It just feels really like yeah, we're not always paying attention to all of the things that we could be, but it's always being felt, the fact that we're not paying that attention, which is why this progress seems so slow, I guess.
And I think it's really important to keep that idea of paying attention, because to come back to the film industry and film world, because I think this is a part of our goal, is that we share different practice of, and I do things that to have a real critical form of living with cinema, we need to pay attention to all the segment, all the situation that are in and around the film, and not accepting that the film is a kind of fiction that is blinding a violence produced elsewhere. This is a plantation system. In the plantation system, when you are living in Europe, you receive sugar, I don't know, something like that, and you don't receive the violence with. So you have the pleasure of the, the softness of the sugar. Cinema is that kind of softness with a lot of violence. And so that's one of the reasons I became producer. It was not to have a big cigar and to have a black car. I'm not able to drive, but there is an image of the producer. For me, it's not only being a creative producer, is having some capacity of and desire to see, to pay attention. When you're producing things, you pay attention to what's happened for real to do that. And so really often I will say all the things I produce, they are attempt towards a certain form of freedom, emancipation, but they are not method. And so I'm really, really, I would like to share something really important, because when I'm inviting, for instance, I'm inviting a lot in art school and film school, there is a lot of students, and mainly white students, I will say, they are looking for methods to keep on extracting without having any problem with people of color. Because the problem with the people at the moment is, I don't want to have problem with people of color, but it's not, I want to stop extracting knowledge. I don't want to stop making violence on people. I don't want to stop manipulating the idea and the images. I want to keep on. But it seems, it looks as if you are the right person to have a good method to do it in a really clever way. Even never think about a real ethic and real political involvement, and only in the strategy of keep on doing the neoliberal movement and the violence of the plantation, which is really, for me, really dramatic at that point. Because I think, and we have to talk about that, and being a producer is the right place to know that, and being a festival programmer, I know it's the right place to show all those aspects of the violence, and etc., etc. And for me, what we really need at the very moment for the film world is a critique that is an assemblage of all this point of view and desire of see. Because the world of cinema is where there are images on the screen, but it's based on the desire of not see things. So it's a visual art with a desire of not see the reality. So that kind of, I call it political illusion, because political illusion are more dangerous than illusion. People don't want to have anything to do with politics. It's some things. But the other problematic space, and more problematic for me, is people that says that they are doing a kind of political things, but they are not, because they don't want to see where politics is in the cinema. It's not a thematic. It's not an illusion. It's really a concrete thing that you can even see in the film if you look at it with attention. It says, I'm sorry, but I see that something doesn't work for me in that film. And it happened for me really often. And sometimes people say, oh, everybody loves that film. That's people of color. They're happy. Oh, it's like, I think something doesn't work for me. And so when you dig it, when you call the producer, when you see, you understand, okay, I was right. Something doesn't work in that. And you can see in the screen. It's not only a knowledge that you get for elsewhere. It's not only to have more information. But if you pay that attention. So we need a Black critic journal. I say it right now. We need it. We need people able to address a certain kind of really important and deep critics to cinema now. It's really urgent.
I think something that like comes out, and I'm glad that you also are picking up everything that I'm not picking up on. One thing that is like clear here is the view that you hold that is not in opposition, but that is contrary to that of the hegemony. The separation between that is done, the separation between product and process, and the focus on the final product, instead of understanding that the process is equally important, and the choices, the practices, and the ways of collaborating or not, etc., are an inherent part of it. And that made me think of also, you spoke earlier, that it seems that we are in this context where we figuring out how to achieve this freedom, how to achieve this liberation, etc., how to find a way back to self, knowing self, listening to self, understanding self. So figuring out, while creating theory and practice, as like everything happening in real time, while at the same time being watched from the outside, and mixing that then with this no, so I'm two things at the same time. So everything happens simultaneously, and including this, which creates, and the cacophony is part of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's also what you also talk about, Olivier, and I think you do it in different ways also, Jemma, is that in this cacophony, as important, I think, is the room for pauses and silence. You, Olivier, talk about speechlessness, the fear-induced speechlessness, and the knowledge that is hidden also in the silence and the pauses and the absence of speech, etc. And from that, so if you want to speak to that, both of you, and after that, we can talk about kidnapped decolonization processes, which you already started talking about. But if you could talk about the first part.
Really quickly, just to let Jemma complete it really quickly, just to say that for me, in the cacophony is always also, and I talk about the politics of frequency. This is really the idea of attention too, because in the Creole and Caribbean cacophony, you can hear everything if you pay attention on all the voice there. So the cacophony is also a strategy of opacity. So it looks as if it will be a cacophony because everything is coming at the same moment. But in that real time, you can have that really specific attention that make you able to say, I'm in the really that kind of really intense conversation that exists in the Caribbean context where everybody is speaking at the same time. We are able to listen to each other. It's a technique of listening and hiding and be silent. And so there is a lot of movement in the so-called cacophony, which is not a kind of negative things for me. Is really a kind of strategy also saying and not saying at the same time. So how you protect, because people are watching you, as you say exactly and really clearly, Katarina, because you always know that people are watching you. You always have to be able to speak and what I call to de-speak. And the cacophony is a practice of de-speaking. So you are speaking for some people and you are hiding your speech to other people and the same movement. So this is that really specific sound that some people can hear with attention and others not. So this is really for me the idea of what we have to try to do. And just to add something, for sure, what I feel is that people who arrive in professional people of color nowadays, they can accept the system as it is, or they can make the decision to dismantle it, which is a huge task. But we don't have any choice from my perspective. So what is unfair, I would say in a certain way, is that the people of color arriving now, they got the huge task that people didn't do before. So we got some inheritance for sure, but now we have to achieve something instead, and we could decide just to say in a really comfortable situation, say, okay, this is business as usual. But deeply in us, we can't. So it's a really difficult task in South, because it's not only a decision you take. I think something in you take the decision for you and push you to refuse for your life something. It's really a living effect.
Yeah, I think this thing as well, like it goes back to what you were saying at the beginning, Katarina, about leaving space for like disagreement or discomfort, and in a way, like as people of color, like working in these places, we're used to feeling uncomfortable, like actually quite a lot. and it becomes this very like normalized way of being in a way, or at least for me, like I really understood that there was a way that I wasn't listening to how things didn't make sense, right? And I think that's what often happens. So what you're describing, Olivier, about this choice, when you enter a place of like, you can do things differently or you can do things the same, right? And I think most people want to, you know, I think there is a small group of people who are only out for themselves. But I would say that a lot of people enter these spaces with an openness and a wish to do things differently. But that, yeah, like that it is difficult to deal with cacophony when a space is not there to hold it, right? It's not, these spaces are they present themselves as these places of learning and multiplicity, but they cannot deal with conflict. You know, if you go back to some of the stuff that you were talking about before about policies and procedures, and while I don't think it's like our jobs to like rewrite them for people, but if you look at policies and procedures, they're about containment. They're about just processing things so that they're not a problem anymore, right? It's not about, it's not keeping us in relation with one another. It's about releasing ourselves from all of our responsibilities to one another, always. That's what all policies do. Like even a diversity policy is about that. It's like, we will do this so that you won't call us racist. Like it's not because I owe a debt to you because we historically colonize you and therefore we do this work. It is, if I do this, I don't have to hear your outrage anymore, right? And so I don't know, I think there's something there about, which goes into your second question, Katarina, about like this kidnap of decolonial practices and things like that. But I think I'm going to think a lot about what you said about cacophony, because I wrote actually a sentence in This Work Isn't For Us, which was a kind of explanation of why I had structured the piece in the way that I did. And I had structured it in a way which had my voice, my internal voice, my dialogue with others, and then this academic text as well. And I had actually written, this might seem cacophonous to some people, and the reason why it's cacophonous, I can't remember the exact line, but it was something like the reason that then they're cacophonous is because they're never put in the same place together. But actually that's not true. They're constantly put in the same place together. We're just not listening, or we don't value it and we don't hold it and we don't create anything productive out of it. We often just consume it in the artwork. But even then, when we feel that discomfort of like, oh, and I agree with you, Olivier, it always shows up in the work. Like it always shows up in the work when something has been made in a compromised way. I think you can feel a sense of it. But if there is no container with which to take that discomfort or that question, yeah. And also if we are always just taking down the white-led institution or the white director, and we're not having that conversation with each other, then again, we're doing the same thing to each other, right?
Yeah, well, I think you're totally right. Katarina, is you?
No, continue.
No, yeah, it was just to try to to keep on that idea of the cacophonic practice. This is also a task for critics. I'm working on a long text, which is on the way to be a book. It's called A Pledge for an Aesthetic of Trouble. And I do think that the critics have to practice the cacophonic forms, because, I spent the 2 last years, but mainly, 2020, talking with students that I was supposed to be, respondent of tutor in different universities in Goldsmiths, in UK, in Geneva, in Brussels and others. And so, and also in the United States, in Bard College and in CUNY University. And so it was really interesting to see that most of the students of color, they are really in a kind of situation of confusion. And that confusion I've been interested in, because, normally the task of and the job of, I don't know, a thinker, a teacher, I'm a kind of educator, is to help people to clarify what they're saying. You hear what I say, clarify. So there is a kind of darkness in the thought, and you're here to clarify it. This is a notion of reason that I'm totally against. And I was wondering, Olivier, what is possible to develop as a method to give more confidence in them with their confusion and trying to describe why they feel confused. And I feel the main line of the text is saying that. It's saying they are confused because they are trapped in between an inheritance, so the echo of the people before them that is asking to be told untold stories that have, but in the other way, they're asking from the Western art scene to speak. And so there is a tension in between receiving through your body some voices that are coming from people before you and give you some responsibility of what you're going to say. But in the other way, people are asking for the matter you got in you to capture. So you are in a tension in between responding to that. And it's again the cacophonic moment. And I think you are staying in that kind of trouble because you are in between two worlds. And this is really the consequences of being a diaspora in general. So I try to address the notion of being in a situation of confusion, not as a negative thing, but as a state of mind that critics people and thinkers and other have to able to deal with and to talk about as it is. And so we love students says, keep on. You are in the middle of a really trouble zone, but this is the zone where we have to express something really specific. And I do think that people don't want to come in that zone. They want to extract, because you know the colonial strategy is a strategy of extraction, but of distance too. As Ruth Wilson Gilmore will say, abolition is presence, meaning that you have to stay close to the scene of crime. You can't say you're innocent if you want abolition. You have to come close, skin to skin, as I says, to the reality you want to talk about. You have to take a risk. So those people in trouble, people want to take what they got in them and the culture, but they don't want to come into such uncomfortable situation they are living in. So they don't want to care them as people. They want to extract them as matter. And that's why I told them staying in that zone of trouble is staying a matter which is unavailable. And it's really an important idea for me to become unavailable matter. I'm sorry, but I'm not available. I'm not available for you, but I'm here, I'm living something in between. So I think it's also an issue of looking with more attention to some situation instead of trying to sort out situation, to fix things. Just consider that some situation of trouble are consequences of what's happened. And so they are really important figure of our present. The figure of the troubled person, the figure of the person in confusion is the figure of the present for me. But it is the task of the thinker and so to build some tools to be able to address to work which is not totally finished in a way. So where we are asking for finished films, really clean way of saying things, we're just asking for lie. We don't want to see that kind of forms is not totally there, but those forms are a form of reality and form of life for me.
Can I pick up on two things you said, and one thing that I might project on you that you might have not said, but it suits me to see it that way. One was because Jemma, you talk about release, how the policies and rules in institutions are there to release, to make things. Less uncomfortable. Olivier, you talk about the goal to clarify the role of the teacher, the role of the leader, the role of the dominant to clarify, which is also some kind of release, right? And then so where I might be inventing was that you said something about that I understood, Jemma, as also the disagreements. Not with the dominant institutions, but between us, like between practitioner, brown and black, or marginalized practitioners. And then I wanted to add to that the concept of diaspora, since all of us speak from that perspective, and the diaspora has the advantage and the disadvantage of being very hard to unite around something, because of experiences, actual backgrounds, experiences, understanding of actual, there's no room for an illusion of unity. And how do we, so to add to that, because we also speak about sharing, collaboration, solidarity, how do we navigate that? And before I ask you to comment that, I do invite the audience to ask, if you have questions, to ask something completely different also. We really want your engagement, so please be welcome. But now back to Jemma and Olivier, please, if you can speak to what
I think what you're talking about is the way that we've all internalized imperialism. I think really, to me, like all of the threads that you brought together from that's really how I hear it, in the sense that, you know, all these policies and procedures, at least, you know, a lot of cultural institutions in the UK are charities, and many of their procedures and policies and ways of working date back to the East India Company. And these things are, as Olivier said, about extraction, but also transaction. They're about, they're not about interrelation. They're not about responsibility to one another. They're about changing something to suit the dominant person with the most power, not about being changed. Again, something that you said right at the beginning, Katarina, about like the space is changing or the person changing. And so I just really think, you know, in these, again, when we speak about one another as well, like when we speak to one another, we are not in the practice, we are still in this practice of imperialism. So I think it is really important to celebrate our friends, and I want to celebrate all of my friends and all of my collaborators, but I see friendship as like a space of like generative conflict as well, right? Like I learn from my friends, and my friends help me to be better as a person. And if I do something to hurt my friends, I would hope that they would have enough respect for me for them to tell me. And I wonder about how much space there is for us to do that in these places where we just have to uncritically celebrate one another, or we are fighting each other for scarce resources, right? And again, all of the things that Olivier has talked about plantation logics, but yeah, I guess I've started to think about it as internalized imperialism, and we see this in the ways that we lift people up as well. And I think this sort of uncritical lifting up of people is also really unhelpful and not freeing. It's not liberatory at all.
Yeah, but I think this is also a syndrome of the angry black man, angry black woman. We don't want to always being considered as angry persons. So finally, it created a kind of process of pacification. And I do think people have to remember that the pacification of the social conflict are always been a part of the plantation system, including people of color. We were not slaves, we were people, free people of color. Meaning that the process of pacification and of consent, the consent is something that is coming with the slavery and coming with the violence. There are people have to witness to the violence, to consent to it, if they are not the target of it. So all the display we are in is not new. Some people says, oh, you see there is new people in color in institutions, but you don't know the story. In these stories always happen. In the time of the plantation, it used to have people of color that were free people of color. They had to accept and consent to a certain kind of violence. It's not new. And this is a fake news in that way. It's nothing new for me. It's always been the same problem between the plantation and the plot, the emancipation, the autonomy, and the absence of emancipation and the absence of autonomy. This is the only criteria that we have to keep. The rest is an illusion of transformation, which is not transformative. And so that's the point for me. And what Jemma said, I'm really sensitive in that question of also friendship and the capacity of talk each other. You know why? Because I think it's, of course, as you said, the process of internalization of the imperialism, but not only that, it's also a relation way of speaking between us. We are unable to speak in between us without the third eye, which is the white eye. We are always performing under a white eye, even between us. This is our problem. And so that's why we are not able to have some conflict, because the conflict is possible with real people that are real keen. And so, cause we are always performing in a process of a performance with the real of the imaginary presence of the white eyes, we can't say any truth in that context. So we have also to dismantle in our whole perception and way of feeling things. We have to dismantle our own desire of being recognized by the white eyes.
Yeah.
As soon as you succeed in that, you are able to talk to other people of color, and you feel yourself for yourself as a rupture. Okay, I feel myself, and you feel that a lot of people come to you to give you a piece of advice, to tell you what you think is shit, which is a good sign. It's a really good sign. It says, okay, I find something, because there is so many people I know says, yeah, Olivier, you're a clever person. You don't gonna, okay. The more you say that, the more I know I'm going in the right way, because it seems to be annoying for you that I'm trying to build new display of conversation. But we got a part of the responsibility of that. This is also a part of desire of being part of the plantation, which is a paradoxical relationship. But the same thing with violence in a family, for instance. Some people stay in the family really on the core, in the heart of the violence, and they can't find enough resources to leave that place. They still have a desire to be part of something, and they're afraid to be alone. And we feel the same. We are afraid to be alone by leaving the plantation.
And I think that's why the importance of a vision of freedom, of liberation, is crucial, because otherwise we exist in opposition, and in opposition we have, for example, then the problem of false united fronts. And I was thinking about what you're saying, Jemma, is this hysterical celebration of things that aren't even celebration worthy, so to say. It's like nothings. And I'm thinking, for example, in the in African cinema where I operate, there's a lot of this completely meaningless, the first of this and the first of that and the first of, it's like it's completely irrelevant, and what it does is just to stimulate competition among Africans, because the first of this and that means that finally the empire broke down a little bit so someone could see through, and that's not to be celebrated as one person's achievement, just
Totally.
also crumbling at the moment. Sorry, Jemma, you wanted to say something, and then I think I have a few questions.
I think it relates to what you just said, really, this tension between wanting to come together and there being real power in coming together, right? That so much of, you know, the fact that we are separated often and made the only one, as you described, Katarina, earlier, you know, this decision to never be the only one is like a really wise decision, but also that we come to, like, is it possible in these spaces to come together in strength? And I think there is so much that stops us from coming together in strength, that often we come together in lack and sometimes in trauma, and then other times to replicate the thing that we're trying to leave. You know, we're just creating new structures with the same old personalities populating them and the same value systems, which is not change. So yeah, I think we're in this space of like, how do we collectivize, but how do we do that really difficult work of not replicating the thing that has marginalized the most interesting people always, right? And I think that is the dangerous point right now. And yeah, I just wonder about this process of, and I don't know, it's so hard. Like I tried to practice it all the time, and it's hard. It's hard. It's the hardest thing in the world, because everybody wants to do this thing that they love. And it is hard to do this thing that you love because there's only so much space for us. And that scarcity mindset is so huge, and it ruins friendships. It ruins really generative, kind of working and collaborative, creative partnerships. There's in history, like there are so many stories of this. And I just, that's why like learning about transformative justice in the last couple of years has been so expansive for me, because yeah, it's about those practices of care between each other, those practices of listening to the cacophony, as Olivier described, this idea of knowing when you're being transactional or extractive, and really sitting with that and going, okay, I'm doing this and I actually don't know a different way to do it. So do I even want to do this thing anymore, right? If there is no other way to do it but to extract, then am I still going to do this thing? Because that's what I think it boils down to when you talk about like the theme of this panel, like, where the space should be, inside or outside. Well, maybe it's just about getting rid of it and starting new, right? As we have been alluding to this whole time.
Yeah, but I think that there is. I'm sorry. I think there is. Yeah. Then no. It's just to. It was just to come back to something before. I'm sorry. I'm jumping my idea. Yeah. I think the question of having a vision. I'm sorry. I'm coming back to it.
Please.
I think is like exactly what Jemma said at the end about doing something that have been never done before. Meaning that you want to do something, but in a way that is not a kind of repetition of a really toxic attitude. The notion of vision is coming from the notion of projection, and the projection is really a Western epistemology. So can we build a vision based of our attentions to what is coming, or what Fred Moten will call anticipation, because it's coming from a very specific attention of people that always been under the threat of some danger. And I'm really interested in that. Is there any potential anticipation and speculative proposal which are not projection? Because the projection is a detachment of from here to there, is a try to see where you are not. And for me, the notion, the speculative movement is a really movement step by step from here to there, but always being in relation with, always be in contact with things, in relation with. Because I think the story of the vision and the projection in the Western epistemology, it was always something which is not there. And so I don't really believe that we can rebuild a certain kind of Black futurity with that kind of epistemology of, even some Black futurist statement are really coming in a way partly with the epistemology of the vision of the elsewhere. I think the notion of abolition is really notion to be present to things. And for me, to be present is a vision. It's a really strong vision.
Yeah.
But is not to be blind of what is there. And so it's a vision of, so it's not far, it's not the far, it's the close. And perhaps the world we are looking for is really close physically, but we can't see it. So it's the process of seeing and the desire of seeing, which is for me basically a new relationship with cinema. So not the desire of the illusion, the desire of seeing with. So it's something else. And so it can be a form of abolition in cinema to ask for presence. You feel that it's fragile, and always says, is it possible to express the fragility of our community in a film? I was asking that recently in a project I'm working on, and really quickly we switched to a more heroic form that is pleasant for everybody. Nobody wants to say, okay, it's really fragile, and when I'm looking for work that is not totally there, okay, I would love to keep it like it is, so it's more, it's really, no, we have to clean it, we have to clarify it. And people are asking for that. So this is also the kind of desire we have for artworks that have to change too. Because I think when I see super clean, big production about Black people, and Black people are so happy to see that kind of things. But it says, look at that fucking image. Everything is in. The plantation is in front of you, and you are so happy to see it. I think it's a problem. The form we like is the desire that is coming from somewhere for a certain epistemology.
So before, like, I just want to do one reflection before I take some questions, and I hear you talk about that, because going back to you, Jemma, you talked about your writing of this work. This work is not ours. You talked about the spiritual aspect of it, and like a spiritually informed that aspect of it. You, Olivier, you talked about speculative storytelling, and so speculative, and I was also thinking about, when I was thinking in preparation for this, about transformation and the futility of it, and I'm trying to understand the transformation, and then I thought of the word shape-shifting, which is like a divine, like a magical transformation, so to say, of a living organism, which all these institutions are, and then I was thinking about this absolute freedom and liberation that comes with, so if not, we don't want to dismantle, because dismantling is also messy, and it's like dealing with things that are not really ours when we should do other things. So instead of dismantling, I like the concept of acting as if, like you're there, but I do not really care. Acting as if there was total freedom, acting as if everything was possible, acting as if there was magic and room for spirit, etc. Could you speak to that?
I think you are talking about abolition, because I was talking with Ruth Gilmore recently in the talk. It was in May. We talk a lot about doing as if. It was really, I think the as if is really a practice of not trying to have a vision, something is not there, but something is here. And the as if is also what I try to express with the cacophony. It's a way of speaking and de-speaking. You have to do as if for some people to experiment a rehearsal in life, and you have to do as if for the eye that is looking at you, and the as if is a masquerade. This is it has been a long time our problem. The masquerade have been our problem because all the obligation of playing a role. But finally, again, I will take that situation for a kind of structural aspect of a new epistemology. You are talking about diaspora. There is an obligation to do partly as if when you are from a diaspora, and it becomes, I think, a form, an aesthetic. I think we have to care about some negative aspect of our life that became some aesthetic we can use. So it's not only dismantling, it's also saying, of course, we have learned to use our body in a certain way. You have to learn to use our femininity and masculinity in a certain way. But it became a kind of aesthetic that we have to use now, not only as a negative aspect of how we have been dominated, but as a kind of what I call the aesthetic of trouble, which is the aesthetic also of hyper feelings things. A kind of permanent hyper anticipation, hyper feeling, because you don't have a safe life. And because you don't have a safe life, you are always in a kind of hyper attention. What can we do with that hyper attention to build a vision?
Yeah.
And I think, again, like this idea of abolition as a practice of relation, but also an investment that helps something to grow. But ultimately, it's a creative force, right? And but that might mean that something else disappears. That's really what abolition is, right? It's not about paying attention to the thing that needs to go. It's about paying attention to the thing that needs to grow. And I think that it's completely a different project to the one of changing institutions. And it is more generative. It allows us to have more pleasure when we are transforming. So I like this idea of shape shifting, because there's something about that thinks of like, what do we desire to be? And we can close our eyes and we can become it. And that there is something really speculative and beautiful about that. But I think, just the practice of being, and I think, Olivier, what you've been talking about in terms of form and aesthetic is just so incredibly important, and nobody is talking about this. Like, we are all continuously replicating story structures. We did start talking about, actually, when everyone was into studying abolition, we started talking about true crime for a bit, right? And how the narrative of true crime had made us normalized the police in a way that was completely at odds with the actual way that they behave and why they exist. So, and so what other ways have we done that? What other things have we normalized? What other ways do we continue to do that? And how can we think of story differently, right? So narrative structure is imperialist, like it just is. The hero, the star is like imperialist. All of this is something that we buy into, and also something that we gain pleasure from, right? So there's nothing wrong with like desiring resolution in our lives, but it's a bit like what you said, Olivier, like there is something to be spoken about us going into the cinema to think through these things, and really inside the intention is that we're just glad they're not happening to us. And how can that thing of being in the cinema want us to act and change that? Or maybe that's too flat, the way that I've phrased that, but what do we want to do when we see these things? How do we want to feel? Do we want to just feel like we've consumed something, or do we feel like we want to change something and continue being in relation with that piece and the reality inside it? I think it's so important. I don't see many people speaking about it in the way that Olivier just has.
And can I ask you both to then continue that discussion in your capacities as programmer and producer?
Yeah, I think we have to consider that we are doing prototype or attempt. I always consider that I'm not here to fix and sort out problems. I'm in the middle of a lot of problems by film producing, because the industry is imperialist too, and there is the psychology of people you are working with are totally imperialist. So in an all level, you are in front of the empire. So you have to try to create some plots. And for me, films are attempts to plots in a really toxic imperial situation. Because I think it's really an issue of desire. So it's a long time, because we have to make everybody, all the person that is participating to the art world and cinema world, having another kind of desire, from the programmer to the critics, from the audience to the artists to the filmmakers. Because some people find very seductive some transformative ideas. But again, to come back to the very first thing we said, they don't want it to happen for real. Meaning they find, because this is our problem. The neoliberal system is absorbing all the idea we have, including emancipation. But the only one thing you can see as a difference is that they don't want to achieve it. They don't want to. So in a certain way, they don't capture it. So it's again a new vocabulary we have to create, talking about the extraction. I don't think that that system is able to absorb or to capture the idea of emancipation and the idea of liberty for real.
You mean it's more attractive as a dream?
Yeah, exactly. But we have to be careful not to give them more that they can take, in fact. For instance, you have a big press, a lot of article about a new foundation in Paris from François Pinault, which is the richest person in France. And he bought a lot of things for years. He got a lot of things. So he can create a kind of private museum with his own collection. And a lot of people decide to talk about that in different way. We can say it's a super rich guy that's creating foundation point. No, they want to say more. And several of them that are quite famous creators and people working in the art world, they talk about François Pinault as a super rich right man with that world of emancipation, black struggle, because he bought some artwork that had as a subject emancipation, a black revolution, and so on. And so at that very point, there was a lot of tension. And so I began to write something, a paper, and I stopped it. I take more time just to say, okay, it's not our problem, because this is not black revolution. This is not black emancipation. This is only product of the neoliberal system. And we just have to keep on being concentrated, the emancipation for real, the black revolution for real, and we let them the metaphor. So this is really the problem, even with the film program and festival. They ask you metaphor about liberation and revolution. Okay, we can produce metaphor, but what can we do to do it for real? And I think Christina invited us also to be in relation in that. And I think within Berlin, I think she's one of the person trying to reflect seriously about what could be the consequences of reflecting about that for real and not as a metaphor, not as a kind of game. I think a transformative situation is, I think, for instance, I wrote a lot about riots as a space of transformation and of education, and some famous texts. And I know that a lot of people are dealing with that kind of, sexy riot things and porn riots and so on, without taking any risk in their life in relation with those specific riots and what they want to achieve. It's always the same problem. So we should try to find a way to protect a bit some ideas that are precious for us, just saying we are not talking about the same thing. I'm sorry, we're not talking about the same thing. There is no emancipation in what you are doing. You are playing with the idea of emancipation to do a film in a festival and do your career. It's nice. I don't know, an art collector will buy your work, you will be screened, you will be famous, you will go and party, but we're not talking about the same thing. And this is our mistake, not being able to, in a really simple level, to say that. In the art world, I missed a lot of occasion to just say just that. We are not talking about the same thing, point. Because I think we are looking for it for real, for our life. This is the life we want to live. And our life is not openings, it's not premiere, it's not that, it's not exclusivity, it's not world premiere. Our life is here and now.
Yeah, I think like
Thank you.
what you've been talking about is I guess I've been asking myself like one question in terms of programming, which is how are the conversations that we have about work replicating, imperialism, capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy. This is the conversations, this isn't the films, right? So we are so good at talking about this now, or at least like liberal programmers are really good at having like or many are anyway, maybe some still aren't, but many are really good at just saying, this is a problematic film, or the authorship on this film is problematic, and these films might still get played, but these private conversations will happen where it's like, oh yeah, but we see the issues with it, we had a really good conversation about it, but we decided it was still important to show it. And I think that in the end, it's like, how did that conversation that you had just replicate the thing that you are critiquing? So I'm really interested in that right now, is that people are really brilliant at doing this discourse, but when you call them on the way that they're having conversations, or ways that they're still talking about whether a film is good or bad, whether it's good quality, whether it has the right production values, whether it made sense, when actually it's like, did it make sense to you? Did you even know what the intention of the filmmaker was? Are you even situated to this work? That's still a conversation that programmers aren't good at having. And there is no reason for them to have this conversation.
Yeah.
Because the whole economy of the film festival circuit doesn't need to hold these conversations.
Totally.
Need to. No one is making them do it. No one seems to care. So how do we care? And actually it takes us away. It's hard, right? So this time round as a programmer, after doing this research, it's less fun being a programmer asking all these questions. Like, believe me, it's like not as fun as it used to be, because I have to interrogate myself all the time about why I am doing what I'm doing, why I'm excited about something, why I'm giving something more attention than I'm giving another piece of work, what I am being blind to, what I am being too embracing of. And that isn't why people do these jobs. But then you can't talk about social justice in your film festival if you're not willing to do that back. It just comes down to that. It changes our pleasure, but then what is, again, like what you said before, like, like what is your vision? What do you vision for the future? What do you imagine? Maybe imagine is better. What do you imagine for the future? What do you want to speculate for the future? Because if it is just feeling good, then maybe social justice just isn't your thing.
Yeah, but I think what you are saying is that you are slowing down the process. And so the issue I try to address with the cacophony is also the politics of attention is slowing. Imagine the sound that it can be slowing, and suddenly all those noise are a kind of constellation, and you see a form. Of course, asking all those questions for me as a producer,
Yeah,
is not really productive in the sense of producer is supposed to be somebody is producing something. The more asking question, the less is productive for the film in the sense of it's slowing a lot the process of it. But it's super interesting to be positive in that way, that some people I'm working with accept a certain kind of slowing the process to have a better ethic in it, asking more questions, and others not, or others they accept the slowing as an aesthetic, and suddenly the accelerating and taking and coming back to the system. And I think the notion of vision that you asked Katarina is just the idea for me really simple is, do you want to come back to the master house? Is it the goal? We can talk everything. The last question is that one.
Yeah.
And that's why imagination is better, because
yeah,
it
imagine
gives you more alternatives.
Yeah, but I think imagination is really important to say that we don't want to come back to the house master, which most of the festival are in a way, because as you said exactly, and it's really clear for me, Jemma, and I was totally right with you, okay with you about that. They don't need to ask those questions. They don't create the need, the desire of asking those questions. So they are not productive, again, in their sense. And so this is the real transformative issue of festival, to make those questions important for people, even screening less film as a consequence. Even screening less film as a consequence.
Both, because you said that, and this, because that's an active and political action, so to say, to walk away, or to, like you say, programming less films, saying I can't do this, like say, what is that a possibility that you feel you have to, like, no, this is too this too much compromise, too much. What are the options? What happens? Can we leave? Can we?
I think the option is really in between us. I think personally, when I work in really difficult texts that have been a kind of pamphlet or intervention, writing that I felt really alone. And when they have been published, I found people responding in a really incredible way. And I knew that that text, it was impossible to support by myself alone. Some decision, we can't take those decisions alone. We need that, or the alliance elsewhere says, okay, I'm gonna make the same decision than you. We need that. This is the way we have to rebuild a community. So that community building is based on that kind of potentiality, or for that kind of gesture. A plot is really a space where something can grow. And I love to read texts of people I'm interested in, respond, to be in relation, and we really feel that we support each other in that effort to take in risk. It's not an heroic gesture, as I would like to say. You can do it alone. It doesn't make any sense. It's always looking for knowing and not already known friends you're going to find through a gesture.
And I think that, just to add to that, I think maybe for me, I would articulate it as a commitment not to changing things, but to changing each other, which is just another way of saying what you've said, and a commitment to being changed myself, but not in the ways that I had changed myself before, right? It's about knowing that you are always in this process of learning and understanding and making connections about how things work, but changing what you do as a result, right? And moving with that feels like an important way to work within this contradiction.
Another option I was thinking about when you said understanding this, the realization that you're not alone, and first feeling alone, and realization that you're not, and this has to do with the Machiavellian aspect of the empire, that it's always one at a time, not just what I talked about, being the only person in the room, etc., but that there's this tendency, the one at the time elevated to positions of prominence and power, one programmer, one manager, one featured artist, etc. And what are the is it possible to challenge that, to say no, we come as three, unfortunately, or we can what options do we have there?
Yeah, I think the first step you're doing out of that, I think, just to say globally, the process of learning is also partly based for us in a process of not doing, refusing, and so on. Sometimes when you refuse something, people think it's negative. It's, no, I learned a lot by refusing that, because all the response you get by refusing are really surprising. And I have to say really sincerely, moving a bit of that, doing that, refusing that, not accepting to do that way, or coming with more people than extra, all that gesture out of the system learn you a lot about how the system is rigid and what are the base and the non-say epistemology of the system too. I think for me it's really important. So, because I think there is always a kind of critics of the practice of refusal, or you are negative, you are not, productive. No, the practice of refusal is really productive. And for me, it's a practice of learning. So I do think that, yeah, there is some rules in the festivals. As you say, submission, I like that remarks, but we can find a lot of things that people accept. And we can, take 5 minutes to say, no, I'm sorry, but I think there is something really important with me, with a lot of things relate to agreements, for instance. And so we don't work enough on agreements. And there is a lot in contracts to do, because we accept a society based on contract that are based on a certain kind of ownership that's coming from the empire again. So we are really technically in the justice organized with a lot of element of coming from the colonial inheritance. And so when you are working in different way, you got a lot of small things that you can say, can we stop just a moment to reflect about how it works? Is it possible to do in different way? Just asking those kind of questions help a lot and stop the movement, of always being obliged to do the next things, the next things, the next things, the next things. So it's of course a precarious situation. And at the beginning, Jemma talk about the precarious situation, but I do think it's a part of our position. Is not a precarity as a specific moment. I think there is a precarity in a way of thinking. And I do accept it at that moment of my life, and I'm working for a long time now, and accepting that your way of thinking got a really specific precarity in is not easy, and to accept that. It doesn't mean you can't have a good life. And I really always keep in mind that expression of Judith Butler when she say, okay, I got a bad life, but I want that bad life be a good life. So it's not to say, I want the good life like you decide what is a good life is. I got a bad life in your system, but I want that bad life be a good life. And so I love that idea. It's really escaping from the epistemology of the other. You don't have to say what a good life is for me. And of course, I make bad decisions for you, because as a normal career, in my position in France, I should have been the guy in the institution arriving to the post of, I don't know, manager or something, because it's logical. You are the well-known person, you did the right thing and so on, and suddenly you do something else, what I call emancipation. And that's something else. Few people around you understand that is emancipation, but the rest of people says, why you don't accept to be the director of that big things? It will be nice, you will change things. Says, yes, but if I don't, I create a new space of possibility, which is also super precious. So you can do it. I don't say you don't have to do it, but you can also not do it. It's a possibility that we have to practice. And so I think for me, it's also our role to practice some possible life, to open the possibility for others.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's just, it goes back, we've come in the circle actually to abolition again, because this practice of refusal is exactly it, isn't it? It's this, you take energy from a place that depletes you and you give it to this place that gives you life, and it's inherently generative. And I think even if people don't always understand your choices, when you make these choices to refuse, I think people also understand that you're practicing freedom, and that is so powerful. That's one thing that I have understood from my experience, that more than any institutional or like financial power, there is a power that emanates from someone who is free, a sort of creative power, a creative potential, to also sit in community, which is so huge. And I wish that all artists could feel that and have the resources to practice it. That's a vision, I think, to maybe end with, because that's so impossible for people right now, for so many people, for a variety of reasons, that some people actually can't refuse. They're in a situation where they have to accept jobs and they have to accept a set of circumstances that they didn't choose, because there isn't any other choice. So yeah.
Yeah. But in a way, we are making decision also with the attention of that. I do things that I know it can be a paradox, but when I'm refusing something, I'm refusing something for some people that can't refuse it.
Absolutely.
Because we are a community, and so we are all doing what we can. And at some point you refuse to, and it can be really beautiful when you met some people says, you know, when you did that, it helped me a lot.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you are doing your
I
part.
think that is also part of the having an approach of it's possible also to come and go, but it's not
Totally. There is no definitive, because there is no heroic position. This is what we have to keep in mind. We are doing what we can do with the precarity we are living in, with all our fragility. So there is nowhere to be a hero. We don't need another hero. We need really concrete things, and we can do things alone. So we are doing fragments of the life to come, and we need other fragments. That's why I'm talking about raving our stories. Because I think some people of our community are able to do things we can't do, but they are doing it for us too. We have to consider that a part of us is in what they are doing. And this is really a community building idea, not trying to say as an Eric, where I'm going to do everything as possible. And so this is really the problem we are facing with the art world and the cinema world. People want to be that kind of figure able to take everything. Just says, no, I'm only a part of the thing, and I need really all the voice or the presence or the attempt. And when people from my real community are doing nice things, it's a part of me which is doing that things. So I'm not only happy for that person, I'm happy. Yeah. I'm not happy I'm happy. It's a part of me. This is participating to something. So this is what I'm called being part of a community for real.
Yeah. Okay, I think we are reaching the end of this. You know, there's something I was thinking, but then it's so dangerous. I was thinking about these again. If we go back to the institutions, how do we change? Like, this is how we change. But I also don't want them to listen to people with the imagination and with the other mindset, because the way of learning, it's not about learning, it's about extracting and repackaging and commodify, etc. So actually maybe they shouldn't listen. Those who want to transform shouldn't listen to those in the margin. Parting words from both of you. Parting words before I thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you, and I've just really learned so much from this conversation, and I actually feel really grateful that I wasn't sure what a conversation like this could achieve, but I'm really grateful to understand that there are people that have always and will always work in this way and will always ask these questions, and that will stretch the ways that these conversations are happening. And it's great that there is a platform that Berlinale has opened at the level at which they operate to hold a conversation like this, that, you know, to draw attention to the fact that people have been thinking and working like this for a long time and will always continue to do so, even if this interest changes or shifts in the future.
Yes, thank you to you too. Like Jemma, I'm really happy to have that conversation, because it's a part of the process that we have to be engaged in, to keep on talking and having those conversations, to give us some strength also of doing things, and just really feeling that we are in a way not able to think about all those problems alone, and we need the order, but in a certain kind of display. And I think for me, it has been really difficult to try to find a new way to be in a real relation with trust in that context of hyper extractivism in the art. So I have to say it's blocked me at some point, and through other ways, slowly I refine a way to be more, because it's really violent for you, because when you have a generous practice of sharing, and you arrive in a place where the extraction is everywhere, it blocks you and gives you some acid in your blood. You really, and so I'm trying to, cure you, and so trying to heal you of that feelings of extractivism everywhere and nowhere to talk in a sense of where it's changing a lot step by step, people by people. So I feel that is really important for me, and is a practice of healing to do that kind of conversation. As Jemma says, there are other people that try to address that. I'm not alone in my reflection saying why I'm doing that, blah blah blah. So it's cool. I think it's really important, and we have to keep on it as a nomadic way of being in a lot of different places with those conversations, because I do think we have to transport the conversation from place to place to really feel that our other people can enter in and modify it, because we have also to care about the way we are archiving what we are producing. This is really the most fragile point. And so I'm really interested and concerned about the practice of archiving. And you know that Arsenal and Berliner Forum are really involved in the notion of archive, but I would like to invent another way, practice and perspective for our archive of people of color too.
Okay, thank you so much. I was not nervous before this. And now, thank you for not resolving anything, but for sharing with such enormous generosity. Thank you for your brains and your hearts and your spirits in this conversation. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. I just want to mention tomorrow's discussion is tomorrow at 8 p.m. The next discussion is called a self-determined and ongoing process of intervention. It's a discussion with the curators of the 16 cinematic perspectives on this context. I don't want to say the German because I cannot pronounce German at all. So let's see what I should read. It's all the curators of this section, and the thing these films have in common is their own visual and textual practice of testimony from within, not from the margins. The curators of this explain their motivations and ask how aesthetics and social strategies can engage with each other. It's a panel in English with Katarina Griffith, Jacqueline Sia, Biene Pilavsky, Enoka Yemba, and Kansungo, moderated by Matthias Dell. And all the films in the program are available on the Arsenal platform, www.arsenal-3-berlin.de. Thank you so much for the platform as well, Berlin.
Thank you.
And Arsenal. Thank you.
Merci.